It's Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here actually outside or on top of this mountain, which I haven't named yet. It's kind of a very nice one near the monastery, and thought to record a water for the internet. So I thought that maybe you could start with a little bit of meditation, so maybe you can lean forward a bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in, and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose or the face, can just let those relax. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, it can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath so that it's not just air that one is pulling in and out of the lungs, but it's a kind of energy that's all around and coursing through one's body. And it's possible to pull it into and out of tip of the nose from every direction. So on the in-breath, can inhale breath energy from every direction. On the out-breath, can exhale breath energy in every direction. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make our minds infinite, can make them unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. So this rock, I'm here on this rock. I think I might just adjust my feet a bit because it's a bit of a bony rock, but a beautiful view. So there we are, all set. So so came up here. It's kind of a Samanera had cleared the path here with another monk, and it's kind of a stunning view here. There's actually this kind of other hill or mountain behind. And then apparently there's another one behind that, and there's actually a kuti where monks can stay in that mountain. So wonderful to see this wilderness. And so was actually at a Dhamma discussion with a senior monk yesterday, which was very inspiring. And he was talking about Chittanupassana, this kind of practice that it doesn't get a lot of totally kind of very specific instruction in the canon, probably because there's many ways to do it. And he was describing how in the practice of Chittanupassana, one kind of learns to kind of contemplate whatever kind of negative emotion comes up and ask, why is this coming up? And then usually seeing this is due to some kind of attachment or other that's arisen in the mind. And then he said this kind of practice starts to mature because it usually starts with, I'm angry because this person said something to me or did something to me that challenged my sense of who I was. So, then you learn to let go when you realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm holding on to the sense of who I am. If you can let go of that, then the anger disappears. But he says it gradually penetrates deeper and deeper until basically one realizes that the whole chitta, the whole mind, is kind of thoroughly, what he called, thoroughly polluted by hatred, craving, and delusion. So in other words, all of samsara is this dukkha, all of samsara is suffering. Now this is something that's kind of, known by a lot of people in the Buddhist teachings. It's kind of very clear in the Buddhist teachings. But as Buddhism comes to the West, it's something that often isn't emphasized. And there's probably good reasons for this. I mean, a lot of people first coming to Buddhism and, don't want to, maybe people have a lot of stress in their life, various things, and don't want to, one wouldn't want to sit around thinking about how, all of samsara, all of existence is bound up with suffering, the kind of thing that if a person thinks about it too much could lead to a lot of depression or various things like that. But this is actually one of the central themes of the Buddhist teaching. Kind of reflecting on this, one gains this sense of dispassion towards what they call conditioned things, towards sankharas. Anything that's come together is bound to fall apart. And one of the tricky things about what makes people happy and unhappy is there's these kind of happinesses and kind of unhappinesses that last short periods of time. And then throughout history, they have cycles where people can be more or less happy, more or less happy, more or less happy. And then a person's lifetime can fall straddling some of these cycles. So one of the things is that when life seems good, when life seems like everything's going well, there's this tendency to grasp onto it, tendency to kind of take possession of it, as people become their career, people become, their children, people become, their physical appearance, they become all these various things. And when they're good, they seem good to hang on to, but then when they change, then there's a lot of suffering. So this is kind of the basic theory, one of the basic theories behind the way that kind of suffering arises in a person's mind through attachment. And then people, maybe hear that a bunch of times, like, okay, got that. But then there's the reality of this kind of thing. This is one of the differences between, say, the knowledge that a person gets from books and the knowledge that they get from practice. What something says in the books is one thing, but the experience of it is another thing. So actually, when one learns to cultivate this perception of kind of dispassion towards the world, what it does, instead of making one depressed, if one does it properly, is that it kind of prepares the mind by distancing it from the world, even before anything bad happens. It distances it. One learns to distance the mind when something good happens. One learns to distance the mind when something bad happens. And there's various kind of contemplative techniques that the Buddha uses for this. So one of the things is that, when things seem good, when everything seems like it's going well, then, okay, you want to keep it going that way, obviously. And one wants to try to do one's best to keep it going that way, which, kind of makes sense, of course. You want to have enough food to eat, enough shelter, things are going well, then, if no one isn't hurting anyone, then, of course, one wouldn't want them to go poorly. But then one of the interesting things that can happen in the mind is that when things go poorly, when things don't go the way one expects, it's seen as this kind of a terrible shift from the norm. And of course, it is maybe very unpleasant, but it can be seen as something that shouldn't happen, something that kind of couldn't happen, or something totally out of left field, which often they are. And so kind of, especially now people, or especially now with this kind of coronavirus, kind of can seem like, something that was totally unexpected, something that shouldn't happen. And of course, it is something unexpected, and, see how it all plays out. But one of the interesting things about it is that these things, when one is present in them, if one's present in a coronavirus situation, it kind of seems like it's never going to end. Coronavirus would keep, going forever or something like that, or, just kind of seems like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But then when the situation does end, as eventually everything ends, then what tends to happen very quickly is that one can forget about whatever unexpected situation arose, whatever unfortunate situation arose. It can be seen as a kind of blip away from the norm, a kind of a deviation that isn't really meant to happen, and that was a mistake, and that was easily fixed so that one can continue along whatever course it might be. And what this is actually in the mind is this aspect of delusion or ignorance. It's this delusion or ignorance that makes people grab onto things that eventually cause them to be unhappy and take them as their own. And this is a delusion or ignorance that sometimes very obvious in the mind. Some suffering comes up or whatever when coronavirus or whatever it might be, some kind of totally unexpected suffering comes up. When it ends, one doesn't want to go back and think that one is subject to this kind of thing again. And again, there can be unskillful ways to think about negative events that could cause one to be depressed, all these various things. But in the Buddhist teachings, what one learns to do, is to try to see both sides of the kind of coin. So, this samsara has these kind of nice times that are good, and also it has these times that are bad. So, in terms of history, pandemics are actually something that's been around in human history probably as long as humans have been around. So it's a relatively normal thing in terms of history, not to say that it's a good thing or something one wouldn't want to try to cure. But in terms of looking at the big picture, this is actually a part of human life, this kind of suffering, the suffering of sickness, this kind of reflection that the Buddha often has people do. I'm subject to sickness, I'm not freed from sickness. It kind of, and it goes through various things. I'm subject to old age, I'm not freed from old age. I'm subject to death, I'm not freed from death. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. Now, these are the kind of things that can seem pretty depressing if one reflects on them wrongly, as we were talking about. But when one reflects on them properly, then what it does is can help to give one a whole picture of samsara. When things are good, then one realizes that these things don't belong to me. Of course, one tries to maybe keep them good, doesn't want, if one's in good health, one doesn't want to, try to make one's health bad. But one recognizes that eventually the day will come when one's health becomes bad. If there's kind of no war, eventually the day will probably come when there's going to be a war. Just kind of this is the This is the kind of probability of human existence, and nothing abnormal in terms of history. Disease, nothing abnormal in terms of history. Old age, nothing abnormal in terms of history. So these are the kind of big things that can cause people to suffer. Kind of it's attachment to these things that causes people to suffer when they change. So kind of, I think the other day we were talking about kind of how some of these mountains, they have these kind of streams that kind of come out from underground. And if one cuts off the stream there, it cuts off all these various channels of the stream that come out further down the mountain. And in the same way, when one learns to kind of cut one's attachment to these various things, one learns to cut one's attachment to sickness and health. One learns to try to cut one's attachment to, old age and youth and even life and death. This is where one starts to get a refuge away from these things. A refuge that's safe, a refuge that's secure from these things. Because the fact of the matter is that this is the way that samsara is. It's bound up with old age. It's bound up with youth. It's bound up with happiness. It's bound up with sadness. And these things kind of, to a certain extent, depend on each other. I remember when I used to be a young child in school, and you kind of go out on the weekend, and the weekend would seem so great, But then by the end of, summer holidays, which is 2 months, sometimes people would be getting bored and want to go back to school. Part of the reason for this is because of the contrast, and kind of this happiness that one gets from the weekend is contrasted. One requires this kind of suffering almost to enjoy that happiness. And this is one of the ways that kind of these various polar opposites are bound. They're kind of one and the same. Samsara, when one learns to look at samsara, one learns to look at both its good and bad aspects and see it as a whole. So it's this kind of attachment that keeps people cycling through this kind of process of, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, happiness, happiness and unhappiness, fame and anonymity, all these various things. So when one has a situation like this, like a coronavirus situation, then what one can do as a Buddhist practitioner is to try to bring up heedfulness. In other words, this is the noble truth of suffering manifesting itself right now. This kind of unfortunate situation with coronavirus, whatever worries there may be, one can take note of this in one's mind and go, look, this is samsara, kind of contemplating on it frequently. This suffering that I'm feeling now is bound up with the attachment, the attachment to the happiness that I felt when things were good. They're both part and parcel of the same thing. When one reflects on things in this way, then a couple things can happen. One is that one starts to look for a truer refuge, a refuge inside, a refuge that doesn't depend on all these various external things that can be destroyed by sickness, can be destroyed by old age, can be destroyed by death. And this is essentially what the Buddha is pointing us towards. He's pointing us to try to find a true refuge, a refuge away from these things. The other thing that one can do with this kind of contemplation of the noble truth of dukkha, this kind of one wants to kind of understand this noble truth of dukkha. That's the duty behind it, is that when things get better, probably this, it doesn't, one can never say for sure, but it's likely that at a certain point, coronavirus situation will come to an end. It doesn't, one never knows, but it doesn't seem as serious as say, the plague or the Spanish flu or other past pandemics may have been. So all those came to an end. It's likely that this will come to an end someday. And so what one can do right now is to try to set the perception firmly in one's mind. This is what it's like. Sickness is inevitable, and so that when coronavirus ends, it doesn't quickly become this cover-up. Like this was a standard deviation from the norm. Everything's back to normal now. That was a little blip. One learns to see that both these things are tied together. This is part and parcel of samsara. There's no having health without sickness. There's no escaping. Both of those things are both tied together. So this is the radical aspect of the Buddha's teaching. You might call radical, and one of the reasons perhaps why it's not taught right away is because the Buddha's teachings aren't aimed, there's teachings on merit, teachings on doing good things, teachings on basically maintaining good psychological health, the kind of various things that one might start out with Buddhism for, but they go much deeper than that. They become much more radical to try to completely separate the mind from the world of samsara, from the world of birth and death. Because so long as one is attached to things, so long as one grabs onto things when they're good, one will suffer when they're bad. And although this seems simple, although it seems kind of easy to intellectually understand, this is the reality of it. And kind of coronavirus, suffering from coronavirus, this is the reality of it. So when one brings that up, then one can learn to detach from it. So the reality of happiness is that happiness isn't something that comes from grabbing onto samsara and being spun about in it. I mean, there's certain types of happiness that can come from that. But a true happiness, a safer happiness, is one that comes from detaching from samsara, from detaching from conditions, because it's these conditions, it's these attachment to these conditions, it's this reliance on these conditions, it's this craving for them, it's this ignorance about the way that they cause suffering that causes unhappiness. That's where it springs from, like these kind of, rivers here. One cuts off ignorance, one cuts off craving, one cuts off unhappiness. But also, one cuts off the world. One cuts off one's attachment to samsara, towards happiness and pain, towards gain and loss, towards pleasure and pain, towards fame and anonymity. In other words, towards everything that people love and everything that people hate. One learns to step back from them. And it's here that happiness is found. In renouncing these things, one learns to find a happiness that's more and more true. One learns to go towards nibbana. So it's good to, as much of a paradox as it sounds, to keep coronavirus in mind, to kind of keep the coronavirus time in mind. This is what it's like. This is joined together with the time that's good. So that the next time something like this happens, the next time something unexpected happens, one is prepared for it. One learns to prepare for it by training one's mind. One learns to prepare for it with morality. One learns to prepare for it with generosity. One learns to prepare for it with meditation, with contemplations that separate one's mind from samsara and aim it towards a happiness that's true. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody has a great day, and wishing you all the best till next time.